Alright, in this section of our flipbook, we're going to be going back and doing some review, things that you learned last year. And we need to brush up on these skills because we're going to need them for this unit. The first thing is how to use the Pythagorean Theorem to find the distance between any 2 points. So let's take a look at this. What I'm going to do is let's have you draw a line and let's put a point at right here at -1, 1. Let's label that as A. And then let's put a point at 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So right here, and let's put a point here and label it point B. And then if you would, class, go ahead and draw a line between those 2 points. There we go. And the question is, what is the distance? What's the distance between from point A to point B? Now we can use the Pythagorean theorem here. We can go ahead and say, all right, let's go ahead and change this to a right triangle. And we know that when we draw a right triangle, the one of the legs squared, which is A squared, plus the other leg squared, or B squared, equals C squared, which is this line right here. So let's go ahead and just label this. Here's C. Let's call this side A. Let's call this side B. And if this is a right angle, which it is, we can use Pythagorean theorem to solve this. So let's pick A. A can be either one of the legs. We labeled the bottom one. That's 1, 2, 3. That's 4 units long. So A is 4, so 4 squared. And then B is 1, 2, 3. It's also 4 units long. And that's going to be equal to our hypotenuse, or our length of C squared. So 4 squared is 16. 4 squared is 16 again. That's going to be equal to C squared. 16 plus 16 is 32. So we know 32 is C squared. And remember, the opposite of squaring a number is to square root a number. So if we want to find the value of C, we're going to have to square root C. So C squared is equal to 32. That means C is equal to the square root of 32. And if you put that in your calculator, you're going to get approximately 5.7. And remember, that's a measure of distance. We don't know if these squares are in feet or inches or miles. So we're going to use the word units, 5.7 units. That's our refresher of how to use Pythagorean theorem. Let's take a look now at the distance formula. Distance formula will accomplish the same thing, only we can do it without a graph. So what's the distance between A, which is at -1, 1, there's our point A, and B, which is 3, 5? Well, for the distance formula, which is this equation right here, we're going to have to know the values of x sub 2, x sub 1, y sub 2, y sub 1, and we find those by looking at our points. So let's write A is -1, 1, and B is 3, 5. And let's go ahead and label these. Let's call this one x sub 1 and this value y sub 1. The 3 is x sub 2 and the 5 is y sub 2. So there's our values that we'll use to plug into our distance formula. Let's do that now. So the distance between point A and point B is the square root of x sub 2, which is 3, minus x sub 1, which is -1, plus y sub 2, which is 5, minus y sub 1. So there is our equation. Now you can see, class, that we're actually going to be subtracting a negative. That means we are adding 1. So the next step is to begin to simplify this. 3 plus 1 is 4 squared. And 5 minus 1 is also 4 squared. Let's go ahead and simplify that further. 4 squared is 16, plus 4 squared is also 16. That means this is the square root of 16 plus 16, which is 32. And just like the previous one with Pythagorean theorem, we're getting the same answer because we had the same points. Square root of 32 is our distance, and that is approximately 5.7 units. And the last thing we want to remind ourselves of is how to find the midpoint between 2 points. So here's our same 2 points, and the question is, what is the midpoint between those 2 points? Well, here's our midpoint formula. We're going to use the same x sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 1, y sub 2. In fact, in this case, I'm not going to rewrite the points. I'm just going to put the abbreviations below each one of these points. And you could have labeled the b value x sub 1, y sub 1, and the a value x sub 2, y sub 2. It makes no difference. It'll work out the same. So now we got our midpoint. Let's plug in our values. X sub 1 is negative 1 plus x sub 2 over 2, and then y sub 1, which is 1, plus y sub 2 over 2. Let's simplify that. Negative 1 plus 3 is positive 2 over 2. 1 plus 5 is 6. That's 6 over 2. And we can simplify that one step further. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And there's our midpoint, 1, 3. Let's take a look at it and see if it makes sense. Here's 1, 1, 3 is right here, which makes total sense. It's on our line, and it appears to be exactly in between point A and point B. So when you have a graph, it's always nice to go back and check your midpoint to see if it makes sense. So there's your reminder of how to use Pythagorean theorem to find distance, how to use the distance formula, and how to use the midpoint formula.